them like Cleveland Indians. They'll always be the Indians. But them Guardians are kicking some butt.
All right, so we're going to get started, Joel, so that we can go ahead and get chatting about all these topics. So obviously we're going to keep having the food come in, or if you need to order anything, feel free. Sherry takes great care of us, so we always appreciate her. So what we'll do, and look, other people may come join in, but one of the things I wanted to kind of just get us started, I want to open up first about, so the North Shore REIA, we do 4 meetings a month. This is the one that we do during lunchtime. A lot of the other ones are at night. And I'll explain kind of what those look like. But my name is Courtney Fricke. I put these meetings on every month. The goal here is to raise the understanding and the education level for investors. Generally speaking, these meetings are free to attend. 2 of them we do at either like a restaurant or a coffee house. We just say, hey, please, if you order something, take care of your tab, just as a thank you for using their room. So for example, this is our Real Estate Investing 101 Lunch and Learn, where we, over the entire year, once a month, we hit one topic every month that's just kind of like give you a great understanding of various topics. So then we had, earlier on this week, we had Wednesday, which is our Hammond meeting. That one, 1 month we played cash flow, which is what we did, the cash flow game. If you've heard of Rich Dad, Poor Dad's book, there's that, they have the board game. So we played that on Wednesday, which is always fun. I know you guys were there for that.
It's fun.
Yeah, always have fun with that. And then Hammond, we switch between playing that game or doing like basically instead of just Bob and I talking like we're going to do today, we all sit around a table and we just kind of talk through where we're at, anything we're trying to overcome. It's like a round table discussion, which gets really good. So that's kind of the Hammond meeting. And then we have the main meetings in Covington. That one is where we've got the speaker up front. It's in the side of a hotel room in Hammond, and that in Covington. What am I saying? In Covington. So that's our main meeting. So, for example, earlier this month we had Jack Sternberg talk about the note industry. So buying and selling notes, and instead of having rental properties, it's just lending on it or stuff like that, getting interest. So we bring in different professionals or practitioners, but none of them are selling anything in the sense of we're not having the guy come in selling the 1995 program. That's what we don't want. So those meetings are our main meeting, and then we usually afterwards, for people who want, we continue the party at a restaurant afterwards, and that's when really good networking happens. I know Bob loves it because there's craft beer.
Yeah.
So at the Chimes in Covington. And then the other one is a Zoom meeting where all we're doing is going over who has a deal, who's buying a deal, and like deals are happening in that room. Whether it's like you need funding, whether you have funding available to give, so say, hey, look, I have a wholesale deal I'm looking at selling. Well, maybe there's a cash buyer in the room who's looking for it, and hey, maybe there's a lender who can fund for the deal, and so it's a deal-making Zoom call. So those are our 4 meetings we have each month. Again, these meetings are free to attend. If we just happen to do it at a restaurant or something, we say, hey, if you order something as a thank you to the establishment, just take care of your own tab. But we have these meetings thanks to a few local sponsors. So we've got their cards over here. So we've got Pelican Realty, who's a property management company. They're based out of the South Shore. I've been trying to get them more and more to the North Shore because at the end of the day, they manage almost 300 properties. I think the last time I talked to them, over 100 of them are theirs, and so they're experienced investors themselves. And I can definitely appreciate they know how to get stuff done. So I know I bought a duplex last Tuesday, and it had one side was vacant, and so this was in the city. We had a small turnover of like a little bit of work that needed like less than $2,000, right? They had it on the market ready within just by Friday or Saturday or something like that. So like they were on top of it. It's now available for rent. They're taking in applications. So love to see it. Another one we have is Quarterly Law and Title. They're a great title company. And that can help you with all sorts of type of investment deals. One of the things we're going to be talking about today, we're going to talk about doing creative deals. They don't have a problem doing those. I definitely put them through the ringer doing those types of deals. So they're great. And then lastly, we've got Bob Norton, real estate specific CPA. He's an investor, active investor himself, and they do accounting. So they actually know how to handle how do you tell Uncle Sam about the deals you do, but the most effective way to do it, right? How do you do the accounting for it, whatnot? I remember that was my biggest struggle as I started doing various types of deals was, well, I'm really good at doing the deals, but when it comes to the taxes and paperwork, good luck. So, nonetheless, so thankful to have him. A few things, if you're interested in more of the meeting information, if you go to Courtney10k.com, that's just a digital business card for me. Courtney10k.com, the top left link has the upcoming meeting information. Around the first of the month is when they get released. So this weekend I know I'll find some time and get that released for October. And then the top right link is, so this is being recorded here, the top right link has the YouTube channel. Since 2018, we started recording back in 2018. So there's a lot of older videos on there that you can go in and watch, because hey, maybe you were there and you want to watch it again, or you weren't there and you want to go and learn about certain topics. So thankful for this little smartphone in our pockets, right? It can help with all that. Speaking of meetings next month, we have October 11th is our main Tuesday meeting. And who I have for that one is the St. Tammany Parish Sheriff's Office is coming to talk about how to buy properties at the foreclosure auction.
That's one in Covington?
Correct, that's
okay.
Covington, October 11th, that's our main meeting. The 3 other meetings are ancillary meetings, but our main big meeting every month is the one in Covington. So we have the St. Tammany Parish Sheriff's Office who does the actual public foreclosure auctions. They just had one last Wednesday. Wait, what am I talking about? 2 days ago, the 28th, I think. Yes, the 28th. They had that auction. So if you want to learn how that process works, and look, let me say this, they're the gold standard. What I have learned is some of the other parishes in our region literally come and learn from them how to do it. So it's mandated the process is mandated at the state level. Each parish looks a little bit different. So we have them come share. So even if you buy in other parishes, you might be able to take the information and then just go find out, how does Jefferson do it? And they might do it just a little bit different. But you can at least understand the process for someone who's, when I say they're the gold standard, I'll say other parishes definitely look to them. And so you may go to them and say, hey, how can I come by your auction? And you may not get the full answers like you would from them. I'll just say that. So that's October 11th. And then for our Real Estate 101 Lunch and Learn, the topic for this one here in Slidell next month is going to be about building your real estate investing team. So this is a team sport. For example, Bob, when he handles my taxes and my accounting, that's a huge part of my team, right? Property management, I choose to not self-manage the majority of my properties. So that's a part of my team, right? The title company, all of that part. It's critical because when you have a missing link, it's difficult. So that'll be next month. So with that being said, do you want to give any announcements about deadlines, tax deadlines?
Sure. Well, October 15th is the extension deadline, so we're rushing towards that right now.
I'll say so.
Huh?
I'll say so.
Yeah, we got 2 weeks left, and no sleep for me. So that's the next big deadline. After that, just like when you get to, we have the end of the year basically. January is a big month with payroll and 1099s and all the stuff you do with year-end stuff. So it's a busy month for us to help everyone get that out. And then we're back into the regular tax season.
So you're year-round with deadlines?
For the most part, yeah. So we have this year, since we haven't had a hurricane that hit us directly, we have a reprieve. But Florida, for instance, is going to be extended. I know Oregon had some flooding in there extended. There's different states that have had disasters. We just haven't felt any. And so there's extensions for different parts of the country.
Oh.
Last year,
Not quite done just yet.
last year, we had,
And you just, with the last few years, I'm like, yeah, because I'm gonna be up in the middle of the night, like, I didn't hit some wood.
I mean, last couple of years, we had COVID, which was a big, caused a bunch of extensions, and then also, Ida hit us, so that was a big extension for us. So this year, you know, I don't get extended time to do the tax returns. I've got to actually done this next 2 weeks, so.
Yeah, all right, so it's important, I know, like, for example, I know him and I are meeting before the end of the year because I had some deals go through where I'm like, man, Uncle Sam's gonna take a big portion, let me go make sure I go, before the year ends, I have some strategy time to act before the year's up. All right, so one thing is I want to talk about yesterday. I know we're in St. Tammany Parish, but the city of New Orleans, yesterday I spent a good part of my day in City Hall. Any of you guys know about the ordinance, the Healthy Homes program that was yesterday? Okay, so Healthy Homes program, Councilman J.P. Morrell has introduced it. It's basically a landlord registry, so it's for Orleans Parish for right now. Basically, it's the idea of if it's a property that's 1 to 4 family in the Orleans Parish, if you own it in your own name, you're exempt, which is not advisable, right? You should have it in an LLC. Or if it's Section 8 already, like with a program that has a inspection already, you're exempt. But other than that, it is everyone who has a rental property that doesn't fit those exemptions in Orleans Parish will have to have their properties inspected, pay a registration fee, and then pay a yearly fee per door you have. So for example, if you have, let's just say you have a fourplex that you own in the LLC, you would have an inspection, and you would have to register, and you go into a database with all your information, your phone number, your email, your physical address, things like that. And what they're looking to do is, so you've got yearly fees to pay for each door versus, you know, so it's a multiple. One of the biggest things, I was there yesterday on behalf of the North Shore Real Estate Investors Association. A lot of you guys know I have the privilege of being on WWL every weekend on the Home Improvement Show, and with, you know, taking live calls every Saturday. So we went there, a handful of different organization leaders, you know, NOMAR, the New Orleans area, metro area of realtors, various type of, like the Landlord Association, the Apartment Association, Apartment Owner Association, like a lot of us were there, because in essence, there's a lot of problems with it. In essence, it is, I know that they're trying to weed out the bad apples, and there's a few big bad apples in New Orleans, but what they're doing is they're basically lifting every rock to try to find those bad, to try to find bad apples versus just targeting the, you know, the bad apples that exist and things like that. The hard part is it's another fee and burden on already burdened because of the rising insurance rates. I know LA Citizens in January is trying to raise their rates again, various things like that. So here's one of the biggest things. We actually effectively got them to not vote on it next week. So it was introduced yesterday, and you can only imagine the amount of people there wanting this bill to pass. And it's not that we don't want healthy homes. It's that a program like this already exists. It's called code enforcement, and we pay for it out of our taxes. This program is extra fees, and yeah, it might be, you know, a $60 registration fee and a $60 yearly fee, but it's $175 for being for it to be inspected. It's $200 if they have to come back out after inspection. You know, various things like that. But more than that is the fact that this program already exists and it's not effective. And so what we, you know, what as leaders we want to work with them to say there's better solutions here than what you're proposing. But long story short, please, that CourtneyTenK.com has my social media handles. I'm actually going to be sharing pretty soon on, like, hey, we're going to probably give you some emails or some phone calls of council people to call and talk to voice your concerns, and we can even give you some of some various talking points as well. we're not opposed to people living in good, healthy homes. We're just opposed with the manner they're trying to go about it.
They're gonna pass that on to their renters.
Yes, and there's actually restrictions in the ordinance about that. And so of how you can go about doing that. A big part of it is all the money that's coming from this program. They want to put it into called an anti-displacement fund, but they're not very clear with how the money is going to be handled from the anti-displacement fund. Like there's some ways, but ultimately what it is it's because there's a few big bad apples. If you guys are watching the news, like for example, they had some big apartment complexes that were in horrible, I mean, Oakmont, there's a few of them. There's 3 really bad faith actors. But here's the thing is there's already government agencies in place that can go after these people. Like some of our proposals are, what are some ways we can give code enforcement more teeth, you know, to go after the really bad ones, right? So long story short though is, please stay tuned because they were going to vote on it next week on October 6th. They've agreed to extend that. And there's a level here. For example, I know one of the attorneys was talking, it's a warrantless inspection, a warrantless search. And a big part of that is in other cities, it has been deemed unconstitutional. So the councilman who proposed it was flagging, hey, these other cities have it. One of them being Pittsburgh. There's a 60-day ban on pause on this program in Pittsburgh while a judge is reviewing it because you know, they had proposed that it was unconstitutional. So just kind of keep those things in mind. Obviously Orleans is notorious for you know, their handling of the budget is always a very interesting part. So here's the biggest thing. It's fees it's a tax disguised as fees, and so, but it's just on a subset of the community. But there's ways to absolutely people should be living, and I'm offended to be clumped in with those 3 or anyone who does that. And that was the effect of my speech yesterday when I spoke. And so, so a big part of that, just please stay tuned. I share a lot on social media about it because it's like one of the only ways that we can help them understand. They're getting a ton of phone calls and emails from renters, especially from the apartment complexes that were like heavily affected. So they're in mass emailing and phone calling saying, yes, we want this because they were living in mold infested apartments that should have never been, it should have been condemned, right? Like and so they've got a lot of voice in favor. And so we're going to be working behind the scenes to also do some grassroots, to just say that landlords have a voice too. And look, this is happening in Orleans Parish, but there is no stopping other parishes in the area adopting it afterwards. So just keep that in mind.
This could be a way to evict your tenants if you can't get them out any other way. Just fail an inspection and then kick them out. Right?
So there's actually, so there's literally language in there about how you can't evict a tenant for reporting the situation. And obviously the tenant should have protection rights, like absolutely, like landlords shouldn't be, you know, but at the same time, it's, there's, for example, if a landlord doesn't keep a property in LLC, they're exempt. Like that's like no CPA would recommend you having it in your personal name. No attorney would recommend you keeping rental properties in your own personal name. So nonetheless, that's not our reason for being here today. So we want to get started, but it's something that literally I learned about it on Friday. It's called the Healthy Homes Program. There's a 19-page ordinance that you can read. It's long, but it is. I mean, I learned about it on I think Friday. Talked about it on the radio on Saturday, and then by Tuesday I finally got where the location of where the meeting on Thursday was. You know, and so that's how it is. We're just trying to give people awareness of it because it just is getting close real fast. So, all right, so let's get going. Today we want to talk about, we have talked about numerous topics here, you know, landlording 101, wholesaling 101, flipping 101, you know, various topics like that. Today we want to talk about, okay, you get a property, now what do you do with it on the back end? And we've already talked about a lot of the common ones, wholesaling, flipping, or being a landlord. Let's talk about some of the more advanced exit strategies. So we're going to start off talking about a very common one, which is called short-term rentals, you know, the Airbnbs, things like that. So you want to start off talking about highest and best?
Yeah, so one of the concepts in real estate that doesn't really get talked about a lot at the real estate investor meetings is highest and best use. So when you're a real estate developer and you look at a piece of property, you want to figure out what's the best thing you can do with it, what's going to make the most money, what's going to increase the most value. That's highest and best use. As a non-developer or someone that's just buying a property, you still have that same concept. You might come across a property that is not being used, and there may be a better use for it. And it's like, what would be the best use for this? So it could be a retail store, it could be a warehouse, it could be just a regular house. And one of the uses for that would be a short-term rental. So we bought a duplex in Gulfport earlier this year, and we converted it to a short-term rental. It's maybe 1,000 yards from the beach, walking distance. But it was being lived in, it was being used, so it was like, you know, sort of a regular residence, and one side was being rented out. But we decided to turn it into a short-term rental. And this is happening all over the United States. It's probably one of the hottest topics, I guess, on Bigger Pockets, and just in real estate in general. And the thing you have to really be aware of that, which we'll talk about here a little more, is the local ordinances and whether they're it's zoned properly, or whether they're allowed at all, what kind of permits are required. Right now, for Gulfport, there's no permits that are required. Some of the other cities along the Gulf Coast, there are. A lot of areas that have been resort towns for a long time, people have been renting out houses for a long time. So you got, you know, up in the mountains of Tennessee, you've got along the Gulf Coast in Florida. This is common. They're already set up for that. It was no new thing. They're not passing ordinances to keep people from doing that. But you've also got growth of this inside cities themselves, where the short-term rentals are taking place at hotels and displacing the hotel industry, in a sense. And those guys are fighting back and trying to get the ordinances passed to keep from competition entering the market. And one of the things the cities have done is they basically started charging hotel motel tax for short-term rentals. So if you have a short-term rental, you're going to be paying the same tax that a hotel will, even though you're not really a hotel. But yeah, but you don't actually pay that. The tenants pay that, and so they just expect it.
The guests,
because they're not really tenants. They're not long to be a tenant, but they're guests. And then they also pay a cleaning fee, and that's expected and included in there. And then and of course you can make money on the cleaning fees. Can't really make money on the taxes. You just pass those through to the city. Airbnb and VRBO, which is two of the largest hosting platforms, they actually collect the taxes on your behalf and remit those. If you run the guests through your own system or site or whatever you have set up, and you bypass Airbnb and VRBO, then you have to remit the taxes because they're paying to you. And there are opportunities for doing that because VRBO and Airbnb charge fees just like anything else. That's how they make their money. And they charge fees to the owners, so they take a 3% cut or something like that. But most guests are expecting the cost, and in a lot of cases they're staying at Airbnbs or short-term rentals that are at the same price they would stay at a hotel. And then of course they can bring more family members, they can load up the place. One of the things we did is the duplex that we have, it's 2 bedroom, 2 bath on each side. So and the bedrooms are big enough to put a queen bed in, so we have queen beds in all the bedrooms. And then in the living room, we have a sleeper sofa. So that means we can sleep 6 in there easily. Of course, they can bring the kids, they can lay on the floor or whatever, with air mattress. So that's really the opportunities. You can sleep more people in your property, so you want to look for that. And if you have one that's a little bit bigger, you can make one of the bedrooms a bunk room and put in, you know, two bunk beds, and so you can sleep 4 kids. So you can have a lot more people in there than just one person per room. The other opportunity with these kind of properties is what's called corporate rentals, or they're starting to call them midterm rentals, which basically means it's longer than 30 days, but it's less than a year. The corporate rentals are the markets where you have like traveling nurses, doctors, or other professionals that are going to stay in an area for a while. And instead of renting a long stay hotel or some of these big suites, they want to get a house. And they usually pay, you know, top dollar for marketing rates. A lot of times they're being reimbursed by their companies, so they don't really care what they're spending. In that case, in a lot of cases, because the rentals are more than 30 days, you don't have to collect tax on it because it's a rental now. They're tenants, but that's an alternative. And they're looking for furnished houses or apartments. So that makes a difference in this situation, because they're not going to be moving around. If they're a traveling, contractor or something, they're not going to be carting the furniture around with them. So, but those are the two opportunities you can convert regular homes with. You can buy an apartment building and convert it to Airbnb.
That was what I was going to do. So I was under contract to buy the motel here in Slidell in Old Town. If you guys are familiar, down there in Old Town, right next to City Hall, and the big, hey, how's it going? The big auditorium down there. We were at the Long Stay Motel. So last year I was under contract with it, a 45 unit motel. When I got under contract with it, one of my first things I was looking at, my exit strategies, was I was going to convert it to multifamily and just make it like nice kind of downtown apartments for Slidell, right? And but the reality of that motel was, there was a lot we found during due diligence. So one of the things is, very early on I brought on a partner, because we were like, you know what, there was a apartment complex, like a larger multifamily moratorium that was being extended in St. Timothy Parish around that time. So one of the things we did, because at this point we're taking a property and we're saying, what is the highest and best use? And maybe we're going to change the zoning. Maybe we're going to, whatever that looks like. And so then ultimately, because we couldn't develop it further into multifamily because of that extension that was coming with that moratorium, we said, you know what? Let's look at keeping it a motel. And I personally don't have any short-term rentals in my portfolio. So then I brought in a partner. It's my friend, his name's Jay Massey, Jermaine Massey, a lot of you guys might know him. Jay Massey, I brought him in from California. He has a lot of short-term rentals, and he has bought motels and hotels, and I've known him for a few years now. I said, Jay, let me bring you in. You can be the managing partner. You know, I found the deal, I'll raise the money. And then one of my other partners was going, as a contractor, was going to do basically the project management of doing the major renovation. And the things I learned from Jay were like, because it was basically, it's like having a short-term rental, but you get 45 and they're all right next door to each other. I was like, all right, well, I guess apparently I'm not going to go small here. I'm just going to, instead of getting one short-term rental, I'm just going to get a whole bunch of them all at once and learn. But I brought someone on who knew what they were going to do, because obviously that was going to be a big step for me. But with Jay, a lot of things we looked at is, what I learned from him was, we actually paid to do a study. I think it was called a STR report, if I'm not mistaken. So in the hotel industry, it's something they do. I can always look back on that. I'm calling from memory here. But basically, they basically did a study of the area to say, hey, what's in demand here? Like, hey, should it be a boutique hotel? You know, something like various designs. So one of the biggest things I learned, this is really common for the midterm rentals, which is where you have the travel nurses, you have the construction workers, maybe like down here, the Hollywood of the South, you might have people who are working, you know, maybe doing a movie film or something like that. That's like, hey, 6 months down here. Or another big one is insurance. So, for example, the house catches fire and insurance pays them what's called additional living expenses to relocate them while they go through the insurance process to redo their house. Because it's going to take a little while, right? And it's more expensive to have them at hotels the entire time, so a lot of times they look for furnished houses. And so a lot of times with that, there's different markets you can tap into. One of the biggest things with the hotel is I learned that, hey, if we were going to do furnished rentals, one of the things he pointed out in Covington has a ton of, and the main meeting we do for the REIA is at the We Stay Suites. That's an extended stay. It's like a hotel room that has like a little kitchenette. You guys know those type of like extended stays? Yeah. You've got the, Extended Stay America or something like that. You have the various types. All of those types of hotels are a really good indicator that there's high demand for furnished, rentals, because there's, whether it's workers, so if you look in Covington, there's a lot of hospitals in Covington, right? There's a lot of various things like that, and so that was something I learned, that is a way to kind of start to figure out the demand. There's various other sites. AirDNA is a site where you can get, I think it's airdna.co, I think. It's if something.
So you just type AirDNA, you'll go after it.
Yeah. And so there's a various things where you can see where there's demand, because one of the biggest parts there is that you want to make sure that, because you may not be full, like for example, if you're going nightly, you may not be full the full 30 days, depending on the demand for the area. But the question becomes, these short-term rentals, they have heightened expenses, which we'll talk about here in a second. They have heightened expenses, but yes, they can get a higher level of income, but you've got to make sure that you can fill it with demand. So what are some of those heightened expenses that you're not getting with a long-term rental?
So, well, we're paying for all the utilities.
Which you want to be careful about that with like New Orleans, right? The utilities expenses were skyrocketing for a while after the storm.
So we have the utilities. We pay for internet, and we don't have cable because we figured they're short term. They're not coming to watch TV, but they can log on through the internet and download their apps and watch everything.
Okay. So you guys don't have Netflix?
No, but we do have TVs in every single room. It's like,
so they can log into their own.
Yeah.
A lot of times other people, so that's a choice. A lot of people do choose to have like Netflix or stuff like that set up.
Well, a lot of people that already have that, they can log into their account and then they're good to go. So, we're maintaining the property ourselves, so you're mowing the grass and you're doing the cleaning, and then you've got to buy all the linens and the plates and the knives and the forks and all that stuff. And that's usually a one-time cost, but those things wear out, and so they'll have to be replaced. We haven't gotten to the point where anything's worn out yet, but
So that's also additional insurance you can get. You can actually insure the contents. So as a landlord, the insurance that I have is for the building from hazards, but then you also have wind and hail, you have fire, you have flood, but it doesn't ever cover the tenant stuff, right? For a long-term rental. Well, one of the things you can do is you can actually, when it's a short-term rental, you can actually insure the contents, because how much did it cost you to set up the duplex?
about $50,000.
About $50,000 to set up his duplex with all the furniture, all the additionals. Oh, but that was your rehab as well.
Yeah, that includes the rehab. So it's about $25,000
Oh, okay.
to do all the furniture.
Yeah.
And all the incidentals and all the stuff you start out with.
Like all the stuff in the kitchen, the bath, like stuff like that, the linens, all that. So that's not a small chunk of change. And you got the TVs, you got all, So one of the things you can actually do is get insurance to cover the contents as well. So that's it.
So we have that.
So let's any other let's talk pros and cons, and then we'll go into development in a second. Let's talk pros and cons of the short-term rentals.
Well, the pros are higher. The downside
like how much higher?
Let's see. Well, that duplex would rent for probably $900 a side, so $1,800 a month. And so we've been renting it out for, I guess, effectively 3 months at this point, and we've made about $18,000. So we're getting, 4 or 5 times, and it's not full the whole time. So, we're running it probably averaging right now a little over 50% capacity. Now we budgeted for that, and we figured it would make money at 50%. The area on the Gulf Coast has been running about 60 to 70%. Now, of course,
Plus
we're
demand
going.
of like how much per month you're occupied.
Yeah, occupied. And then we're going into the slow season, but one of the things that happens on the coast is they have a lot of festivals and stuff like that that pull a lot of people in. So we're hoping that's going to bring in some stuff. And you also have people from the north that come down and spend extended time in the south, the suburbs, basically. But the downside is there's a lot more management involved. I mean, you've got to be on top of it. We do have a property manager that specializes in that on the Gulf Coast, because I definitely don't have time to do that.
Well, with that management, so normal long-term rental, you're getting calls here and there, you're dealing with rent on the first of the month. For the most part, but with a short-term rental, they're moving in the afternoons, they're there on the weekends, and it's just service. They're a guest, not a tenant. And then the other part is like the cleaning crew is going, you might have someone checking out at 11, someone checking in at 2, or, whatever your number, 4 o'clock, whatever the times are. And maybe they find something between that time from the last guest. So it is very management heavy. So long-term rentals, your average industry is cost for management is 10% of what you make. So it's $1,000 a month rental. It's $100 a month, in essence, for them to manage it throughout the month. Short-term rentals, generally the industry standard is 20 to 30% management of what you make. So let's just say they make $10,000 in 1 month, 20 to 30, that's $2,000 to $3,000 you're just spending on management alone. But if the business makes it makes sense, that's a worthwhile business expense. Otherwise, if you self-manage, understand that is, it's a lot more work.
Yeah, and also though, when you're paying the higher management fees, a lot of the incidental expenses are probably included in that as well. It just is easier to set them billing you, nickel and diming you for everything that they have to buy. It's just a flat fee. They figure out what that is. One of the ways our property manager charges us 10%. She manages about 110 properties on the Gulf Coast, and she works the incidentals into the cleaning fee, so that the guests are basically paying for the incidentals they use in the cleaning fee. So, and that way their cleaning teams basically go out and buy the supplies and they have them. So we have extra stock in the place, but then they have it with them if they need it. So they've already got the budget they work with.
So a few things here. So first of all, this should just be an introduction. If you're wanting to get a short-term rentals, there's a lot more that you want to look into. A big downside is those ordinances. So City of New Orleans is a really good case study. A few years back, they put a moratorium on short-term rentals, and it caused major issues. It was like 2018, something like that, if I recall right. A lot of people who had bought the property where the numbers only made sense for the short-term rental they were freaking out. They were stressing out because they now weren't making that heightened income, and so then they had bought it with only that being able to work. So if you buy one, make sure it can work as a long-term rental, or you have some other options, because if it only works at one number, I mean, if the city can do an ordinance that can stop that. So you want to be careful with that. A part of that is, so right now the City of New Orleans is not writing new permits. A part of their language is that it needs to be in certain zoning. So they're trying to limit the amount of neighborhood short-term rentals, like the residential. So if it's in a residential, they want you to do a homestead exemption, basically live on one side or live in the house and rent out the rooms, or the guest house or the other side of the double. Otherwise, they want it to be zoned like in a commercial area. Even if it's residential, it just needs to be zoned, that commercial part. And recently there was an appeal to that, because they had done a lot of basically trying to limit outside of state investors. So the city of New Orleans has not been without its own issues with this, and it has caused a lot of investors headaches. My point here is you want to have some options, because if a city can take it away from you and your investment is at risk, you want to be prepared. So if you're ever looking into a new market for this, so you guys got one in Georgia, Bob's in Mississippi, right? One of the things you want to look at, you can actually look like City of Slidell, short-term rental ordinance, and you can look into their ordinances, what their stance is. A lot of times there's a loophole that may say you can't rent it for less than 30 days. So, okay, so then can I do the midterm rentals with the traveling nurses, insurance companies, workers, whatever, and you can still pick those on Airbnb and VRBO, just say minimum 30-day stay, right? Yeah. And so you want to look into those. There's also furnishedfinders.com, which is where it's another place where you can list those furnished rentals. That's really big for travel nurses. Fun fact, there are travel nurse staffing companies in our area. There's one in Metairie, one in Covington. I have to go and look for the name, but it's like they exist. They're trying to staff nurses in various companies like that. But that's always been an option. So if you're looking at it, run the numbers on what those look like. So if you go on Furnished Finders, you can go see so I know I go look at that of like, what's the current market rate of what something furnished. Now, respectfully, if I'm looking at a room and it's like Mama's house, so like an outdated one, respectfully, I'm like, okay, versus like an HGTV level themed room, understand it's the same as if you're taking a rental where it's an outdated house asking lower than market rent versus like a new construction house asking top dollar rent, right? So
that was what we had to do, is we had to take this duplex and we had to upgrade it basically so that it was
you get the higher
amount. So
so understand that there's levels to it.
That's why we spent that. Now, if we would just convert to a long-term rental, we could have had someone in there in a few weeks. We wouldn't have had to change anything. But we went ahead and upgraded quite a bit, painted it, changed the flooring out, did a lot of. It was all cosmetic stuff for the most part, except one of the ACs went out right after we got it up and running ready to go. So I had to buy it.
Yeah.
But
of course.
Well,
so
real estate.
I want to give you guys one more tip. We're going to go in, and then we're going to move on to the next topic here. But so my good friend Jay Massey, the one who I was going to bring on with the motel, let me grab this because it's in my phone and I didn't write it down. But he has a phone number that you can text the word blueprint to. So even if you just write down Jay Massey and the word blueprint, he has a phone number that if you text to, he will send you a PDF of like all these like different blueprints for short-term rental that are really good. I have the PDF myself, and I like, for example, one of the things I learned from him is that he does the smart thermostats. But one of the biggest things is if you can control the utilities, you're helping your bottom line. Now, don't make people live in like 80-degree houses, but it's the idea of there's ways that you can set it to where like, hey, if there's no movement, for example, lights, he'll like, whenever they upgrade the house, they upgrade lights to where if no one's in the room, the light shuts itself off. Stuff like various things like that. Another one is you can buy outlets to where they have the USB plug into them, and it's a cheap upgrade, but it like is perceived value, right? And then he had another one where, and this will be my final thoughts, we'll go to development next, is one of the things we were looking at with the motel when we were building out the pro forma, which is something we're going to talk about in development next, is what we rolled out was, what we're going to roll out is basically the cleaning crews, people can choose on their stay, for example, some of their preferences. Do they want firm beds? Do they want really soft and plush? Like the different types of little upgrades where they might pay just a little bit extra to make them have a better, like more custom stay. And so he had like little packages and then of like customizable stays that was a little bit of an upgrade, and his cleaning crew just were notified this is going to be a firm, bed stay or whatever. And it was a way that he, you can get those mattress toppers, or you can get whatever those things look like. There's ways that he was able to integrate some other ways of income as well. So that's short-term rentals. Let's talk about,
Courtney, can I add one more to your list? We've been involved with, for the last couple of years with residential assisted living homes. And they are residential homes in a neighborhood, and when you drive down the street, you wouldn't know that there's a whole bunch of senior citizens living in there. They're really good rentals or fix and flips, right? Because you got a 3, 4, 5 bedroom house, they're gonna rent that. If you rent to a family, you got kids and dogs and all that stuff in there. But residential assisted living, they're using that for the seniors. And instead of renting it for $2,000 or $3,000, you're renting it for $7,000 or $8,000 a month. And then, it's long-term rental. They're going to rent for 10 years. In America, 10,000 adults are turning 65 every day. So it's a huge market that's coming up. So it's a good rental. If you have a big house or another big house, we know people looking for those homes to start residential assisted living homes.
it goes back to that highest and best use.
Best use.
And so on that CourtneyTenK.com, if you guys go on the YouTube channel, I had a friend a few years ago come in and talk about residential assisted living homes, where it's basically taking a home and turning it into basically to where people don't feel like they're living in a hotel.
Right.
It's more of a home, right? And it's just, again, another different model. So appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah.
So let's talk about development here. This is another really big topic that a lot of people are saying, hey, I'm buying a property, I want to get into development. So do you want to talk about your experience with this and some of the things that people are doing development-wise?
Sure. So most of the development stuff that I've had experience with is commercial buildings and bigger commercial developments. Which is a longer process. Usually it's bank financed, and you need to do pro formas and analysis and all this on the project. Would you identify? Oh, sure. So a pro forma is a projection, a financial projection of what the project's going to do. Banks are looking at, they want to make sure you have the debt coverage ratio of at least 1.25, and
Writing it down.
yes, you can watch our commercial one. I did it too. The debt coverage ratio is the net operating income from the property, not counting the mortgage payment. So this is just your rents minus your operating expenses, divided by the mortgage payment, and that's the debt coverage. So the bank wants to know that you have enough income coming in from the property to cover that mortgage payment 1.2 times. And then that shows them that
Your level of profitability.
you're profitable and you're most likely not going to default. Of course, you're doing a projection, and the projection by definition is incorrect. So, so you have to look at your numbers. You have to be reasonable. The bankers, they look at these all the time, so they're going to look at the numbers. And if they see something sort of off, they're going to say, "Well, we're not interested in this project." They're not going to say that your numbers are stupid. They're just going to say, "No, this doesn't fit our criteria," and then,
This debt service coverage ratio, if you're in commercial, especially in development of commercial or multifamily, that is a critical term to understand, because that's how you can really streamline financing, is if you can get deals that fit into that. The other part is pro forma. A lot of people say development's so sexy, they're taking something that's not there or whatever and developing upon it. Literally the majority of time, the majority of developers I know spend most of their time doing pro formas, which is building up these extensive spreadsheets of, hey, what is the first date, first 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, 24 to 36 months of basically what are our expenses. Hey, so let's just say, so Bob helped us. So we had a 535 unit RV park. This deal, when we first got acquainted with the deal, it had 140 tenants. So, help me here. 15, like significantly low occupancy, right? So of 535, only 140 that rented. The lowest number I ever saw at that park was 57 spots rented. Okay? So it's like, that's really low, right? Yes. So a big part of that, what we had to do was build out some pro formas of, we had to do two things though, but we hired Bob to do the pro forma for us because one of, for funding, we had to really work through what is the future profitability, because it was not profitable today.
Right.
The owners had to cut checks, right? So here's the big thing is number one, in that sense, we weren't necessarily building and developing from the ground up, but we're having to really change the dynamic of this management. But for example, when developers, they're saying, hey, based on market rents, based on, you know, known expenses, based on XYZ, what is the future profitability? Because it's the idea, we didn't have the books to go and look at that part to say, this is the past performance. We really had to build out future performance because past and current performance was lackluster. So a big part of that is we built it out in 3 to 5 years. So intervals and then, you know, 3 years and then 5 years, because ultimately here, a second thing that we did was, you know, feasibility study, which is basically one of the things we learned with that park was it was overbuilt for that area's demand. So the reason why it was never, like they'd never seen more than 250 or 300 of the units filled was because it was the largest park in the area. It's one of the largest in the state. And with all the other parks in the area, it just couldn't handle it. So it was it was like the idea that they had the money and they spent it because they could, but it was not to the best use of that area. Does that make sense for demand? Remember we talked about short-term rentals, you want to make sure that the area that you're doing it, you know, it's like the idea of being like, hey, we're gonna go make a lot of money with travel nurses in an area that doesn't have a lot of hospitals, right? You want to make sure there's enough of that. So Bob, on that side, talked about, can you talk about development-wise, you said commercial, talk about what those type of projects look like.
So yeah, so usually with a commercial project, you work back from the end. You're looking at, you know, there's going to be construction time. Construction on a commercial building takes a lot longer. Now, granted, if it's a small little shopping center, it can go up pretty quick. But if it's a big development or it's a redevelopment of something, it could take anywhere from 18 months to 3 years to build and construct it. So you start back from that, and then you've got the design process with the architect and everything to get it done, and all the permitting and everything. And then beyond that, you've got to get all you got to secure the property, get all the rights, do all the funding, do all the analysis, make sure you have all your variances in place and the zoning changes. And if you have to do all that, you have to work all the way back. So you could start a development project, and it'd be 5 years before you start generating income. And so you've got to be able to plan for that and have the funds to get there. And so the bank doesn't want to lend you money to spend money for something 5 years down the road. So you have to have partners for that, or you have to have enough capital to get there.
So that capital is generally for a lot of the upfront costs. So you have what's called soft costs in development. So that soft cost is going to be architect. Architects are expensive.
Yeah.
Literally, our cost for the architect to the redesign of that motel was going to be, I'm either thinking 50 or 98,000 for some reason. Like it was a significant amount, right? For a 45-unit building. Okay. Your permits, all these things, those things are not cheap. But so we're talking big deals here. Even on a single-family new construction house, I mean, you might have impact fees, you have permits, you got, you know, again, your architectural drawings, things like that. There's going to be some upfront costs. You have to get the land, various things like that. So keep in mind, banks come into play at a certain point. This is generally where, you know, you might have to do private money. And look, I'm a creative finance investor. There's not always, you know, the seller can't, generally, for the most part, the seller can't produce capital for you, right? They might finance the land purchase for you while you're doing, you know, the other stuff. So keep that in mind. And Bob just said it is with large and small development, it's a long time before you start profiting, either from just start to finish. One of the other things I want to talk about, so my background is with subdivisions. So one of the things I did was I don't like playing with dirt. But the way that I like the idea of making money with it is what's called entitlements. And it's the idea, there was a project, And my role was to get the, what's like a variance where it was currently zoned for XYZ, and we literally went before the council to change the zoning so that the development, because it was like part commercial of this subdivision, so we were gonna give up the commercial to be able to do, you know, more houses in this plan, and we actually built it out, right? So a part of that, so this is the deal that didn't go through, but what it was is I had it under contract at a you know, so basically what we did is we got it where we got a builder involved, and there was going to be, the builder was going to pay a premium for the property if we could get the zoning, go do the legwork and get the zoning. You see what I'm talking about here? So that's the process called entitlement. And there's people like myself who prefer to be deal makers and structuring deals to do that. And then I leave it to the guy who likes to play with dirt, right? And they buy it fixed and ready to go so they can finish it out. So because some of the bigger builders and developers, they have people on their team that's all they do. They go find properties and they get them ready. They get them what's called shovel ready, to where, you know, you got all the zoning's proper, all the you know, if you need to do some variances, meaning, you know, well, zoning's for this and it only allows for this, but hey, we want to get them to allow for this or whatever. You get it to where all your permits, everything is ready so that when the builder steps in, they're just picking the shovel and starting the work. So there's various roles in development. So I know a lot of people are saying, hey, you know, there's a housing shortage. I wanna look at building a house. Maybe build a duplex somewhere, because maybe there's not a lot of duplexes or triplexes or fiveplex, whatever your goal is, right? So one of the biggest things I want you guys to keep in mind there is, number one, development can be difficult in today's market because there's a lot of things you can't control. You can't control, for example, all of the permits and fees and things that come from the government, but another part of the government is there's more moratoriums they can do. St. Tammany Parish has been really big on this. There has been a, they just extended the moratorium where basically they weren't allowing new development if it wasn't already zoned for it. And so a part of that zoning change process, you have to go before the committee. Well, that council, the Planning and Zoning Council, they put like an 18+ month period where they said no more new neighborhoods, right? Unless it's currently zoned at that. So like there is that opportunity. So one of the things there is you want to just be mindful in that regard. Again, we talked about the short-term rentals, be mindful, because if the government comes in and says, hey, great. So one of the biggest issues when we came across it was, I mean, we had a buyer for the subdivision, but we hadn't gotten the zoning variance from the commercial downgrade to the residential, and they proposed that moratorium, and it scared our buyer away, this developer, because they were like, this could take my 3-year project and turn it into a 5-6 year project, right? What's the market going to be like in 5-6 years? You know, stuff like that. So one of the things you're going to be careful of stuff along those lines. The other thing is contractors, subs. You know, even if you manage the project yourself, but if the subcontractors, either their quality or their timeline, like so budget, how long it takes them, that is not easy on a normal project, much less, you know, things like that. So what are some other pros and cons to development for people to keep in mind before we move on?
Well, the biggest thing is just the timeline that's in there. There is a lot of risk to the developer up front. Mostly you get in and try to get things under contract and you deal with contracts. So you'll be putting up earnest money, and sometimes that's non-refundable. You do a lot of due diligence, and then, you know, just like you do a wholesale deal and with a regular house, you get it under contract and you try to find a buyer. Well, with a commercial deal, you'll get some project under contract and you go looking for a developer or a builder or someone that might want it, and you find out what they need. So if they need the entitlements done, then you can knock out that. I do know that I have a client who invested in a project in Florida where one of the big national builders was interested, basically their client, but the builder told this group that they bought this land and created like 50 or 60 lots out there. They went and got it zoned and got it subdivided and everything. And the builder was buying 5 to 10 lots at a time as they needed to build houses. But the builder didn't want to commit to owning all the land right now. because they weren't sure on what the market was gonna do. So this developer, or the group of guys, gals, I guess, put up the money and hoping that they're gonna make a bunch of money on it. So there's different strategies that you can do with that, but the level of risk is higher in the earlier part of a development project, and that's something you have to be very aware of.
So if you're looking at doing development, a really good group to stay in touch with is like the National Home Builders Association, because one of the things you can look at is what are they doing. So recently they were talking about, even though there's a high demand for let's just talk new construction for residential homes, the last 2 months, the president of the National Home Builders Association was releasing information how there's what's called starts, new construction starts. It's basically them breaking ground and starting construction. New construction starts were down because of concerns with the economy, right? Even though there's an inventory problem, right? A housing shortage per the media. Housing, and the Home Builders Association was talking about how basically developers, look, 2008, a good amount of people who I know who lost a lot of money was because they were doing new construction development. And because by the time they were done, the economy had changed and they couldn't sell them. And they had short-term financing on these properties, so it was just eating away at whatever profit they had. You know, the value of the property's coming down, and then, you know, their high interest or whatever is.
Yeah, the other thing, right now, what we've got is supply costs are still high. It still costs a lot to build a house, but now you've got, because interest rates are up, the value of the house, people can't finance as much, so they're not offering as much, so they're looking to get cheaper houses. And so if you're developing, if you're building new houses, or even if you're flipping houses, you have to worry about this because, you know, the 3 to 6 months it takes you to get there as a flip, or the year it takes you to get there if you're building a new house, the market's completely whacked out. You've got all this money invested in there and you can't sell anywhere near what you got in there.
Yeah.
And most people that are building new houses or flipping, they don't want to be landlords. The numbers don't work for them in that, and they've got too much committed into it, so that's
And
what
it's
you have to
short-term
do.
financing underneath, so that
Yeah.
they have to either refinance or sell. Again, this is an introduction to development. There's a lot of different plays within development. But at the same time, money does not come quickly. For the handful of development deals, you know, or the various types of situations like that, I have actually been in due diligence, so the hotel, I think it was 10 grand I had to walk away from, just all the cost of the reports. When and I mean, I took the sellers out to lunch and I'm like, look, if there is a deal to be found as a creative investor, I can figure it out. But at a certain point, we had to walk away, and it was like 10 grand worth of all, like the appraisals, the STR report, this, that, like all these different reports and different things, the pro forma, all these various things. And I mean, there's a level that, you know, maybe if you're looking at buying a house, you go under contract, you do, you know, $500-600 inspection, or, you know, whatever, $300 to $600 inspection, whatever that looks like. And then, you know what, you know, maybe you have to do a little more pipe inspection, go do a little bit extra. You walk away from that, you're not really hurt, but then, so it's, keep in mind that it's relative, and the risk, there is some risk there, so. All right, let's talk about the final strategy we're gonna talk about, which, again, these are all introductions. We wanna talk about exiting properties creatively. So this is not going to be how do you buy a property with creative financing, this is gonna be how can you exit a property with creative financing. We talked previously on how to buy with creative financing up front. So, let's talk through that. So Bob, let's talk through with your experience on these. What we're talking about here today is, for example, selling a property on a lease option or a master lease option, or on something, on like a bond for deed, or with seller financing, so.
Well, those are all different options. And it depends on the property you have, the tenant, or the tenant buyer in this case, in most of those, or just the buyer. And your underlying financing has a big play on which option you go with. So for instance, it can be done, but it's difficult to do just straight out seller financing if you have a mortgage underneath it, especially if it's with a big bank. Because of the due on sale clause, but also on the fact that the paperwork that you have to do for that is
So seller financing is great if you have free and clear properties.
Right.
We had Jack, the guy who came and talked on notes, his very first deal was he bought 45 properties from a, back in the 70s from someone in Baton Rouge. And it was an ad in the newspaper that said, you know, landlord retiring, you know, looking for a young, ambitious person to buy, type of thing, right? And he's like, hey, in college at LSU, that's me, in the 70s. And it was funny because there was a guy who would buy these properties, pay them down over time, and every, I don't know, 10 or so years, he would go out of business and sell. But what he was doing, he was selling them on seller financing to where he would earn both, you know, principal and interest on it. Does that make sense? And so he was able to basically sell at premiums and you know, do well from there without having to be a landlord. So one of so seller financing, in essence, you're creating a mortgage on the property, kind of like the bank. But the reality with that is, with seller financing, it's not, you know, if you buy some of the bank gives you money to go buy the property. So there's no money created, it's just payments created, okay? Seller financing can be powerful. For example, I just bought a seller financing property last Tuesday in New Orleans, okay? Let me tell you why the seller chose to sell this way and why it was a good deal for her. So this was a duplex in New Orleans East. What it was is it was listed at the 155 on the market, but it had been sitting for over 60 days, and it wasn't selling. They had cracked joists, floor joists, and so it scared two buyers away to where they had paid to come buy, you know, they were under contract to buy the property. When they found out that issue, they wouldn't even give the seller the opportunity to fix it or give a, you know, a concession. They just, I'm scared. As an experienced investor, foundation issues don't worry me as much as the general public, because I know it's just a matter of figuring out what's going to cost me, right? So I go in there and we took a look at it, and I was like, look, my cash price is, you know, a lot less than this. Fixed up, the property was worth around 170. But it was, you know, it was a little outdated. I mean, 2 Section 8 rentals on each side for this duplex. One side was vacant at that point. Long story short, this is what I offered the seller, and what made sense for her was I bought it at $82,000, but I gave her 5% interest over 360 payments. So 360 payments is 30 years. And with that, she got $158,000 over time. Remember, she really wanted that 155. Most of her buyers would have been cash-wise that 90 to 100 range based off of, you know, pin and work and things like that, right? And so she wasn't getting that from the market. She was happy because she still got that higher number she was aiming for. She is no longer the landlord, so, you know, there's issues, whatnot. We're paying, so the property deeded over to us, okay? So it's out of her name, in our name. So if one of our tenants slips and falls, they go to sue us, not her, because they don't go sue Chase. You know, they don't, you know what I mean? Like, if they don't sue the bank. But long story short, she has a first position mortgage on that property for herself with her seller financing. And in that is an asset just like a property is an asset. She could sell that. She could trade that. But it's money coming into her every month. If we were to ever fail to make that payment, she could then take the property back, right? Right? And then she would be able to keep all the payments and any improvements, right? So she liked that. She liked this option because she was like, Dad had left her these properties, but she didn't like being a landlord. It was expensive to her to be a landlord. Thank you, Dad, for the inherited properties, but I'm having to put money in for this and whatnot. So, long story short, seller financing is a great opportunity for some people because you then can chase interest rather than rent, which over time, both can make you money and make you good money. A lot of people don't like the headaches of properties, okay? So that is seller financing. Do you want to talk about lease options?
Sure. So with lease option, what you do is it's another way of financing the sale of your property. You find a tenant who wants to lease the property from you and wants to buy it at some point in time. A lot of times these are individuals who may be self-employed, they have a hard time getting a loan, or someone they're working on getting their credit fixed up and they need some time to do that. And so you give them the option to purchase the house at a certain price at a certain date in the future, and then they pay you rent until that time. And there can be all sorts of variables in this thing. But basically you have two documents. You have a lease and then you have an option document. And the best way to structure it is you have the lease itself, just a standalone lease. It could be a standard lease or anything. But then you have the option document that refers to the lease. So if they default on the lease, they also default on the option. They lose the option. If you combine those into those both in a single document, then if you're going to evict them and the judge sees that there's an option, they're going to say, well, wait a second, I got to explore this. There may not be an easy way to evict them. So it's good to have the two documents separate.
Yeah, that's really important. So that option is the right to buy. The lease is the right to occupy, right? And so a big part with lease options, so anytime that I have a property that is not a property that I want to keep as a rental, for numerous reasons, could be location, whatever, the type of home. If this is good for pretty houses, but also ones that maybe need a little bit of work. So for example, I had one in Hammond. So I bought this property. And we offered it on a lease option. So the person that we got in as the tenant buyer, okay, so they're a tenant, but that option is they have the right to buy. So this one in Hammond, we got $10,000 down from this tenant, $1,300 a month in rent, and none of that rent goes towards the principal. And we actually, during the application process, took the best applicants and actually gave them a few local trusted lenders to talk to. And those lenders helped them see how long they had. And because as a part, it's a rent-to-own program, and it's the idea of, so the part of the option, you need 3 things on an option. You need to know what is the price they have to be able to buy it at. It's called your strike price. So for her, it was like $179,900. Okay, and then you need the option consideration fee, which was the $10,000. If she were to buy us out, that gets reduced from the purchase price. So then she'd only need to finance the $169,900. Does that make sense? And then the third one is the time period. It's how long does she have the right to buy? It could be 1 year, it could be 3 years, it could be 20 years, right? So she had 2 years to buy this property from us. And so what it is, while she's renting, she was working on she had just a little bit left on her credit. It was a bruised credit. She just had 6 months of working with the lender to where she would be able to pay down a credit card and qualify to get the loan. But she was so happy because at that point the home was, she was protected and had the right to buy it. Sadly, this tenant passed away during COVID. And so we dealt with that. But in essence, though, we had to go to we went to the heirs, long story short. That's more of an extreme case, but one of the things is ultimately after the heirs declined to step into her place, we then said, okay, we're going to go through the formality of doing the eviction. At that point, we're bringing the lease because they had drained the bank accounts, and so the automatic payments were not being made by the family at that point, right? So they had defaulted on the lease, right, the monthly payments. And just like any lease, if they don't pay, but it can be default for other reasons too, though. Here's the craziest thing. Obviously, that was tragic, but what I found is that there's so many people who are great candidates, but just for some reason, I find 75% of my lease options, they don't always go through and buy. I think that maybe it's because time changes people, their plans and whatnot. Who knows? But I don't like just putting the person with the most amount of money down. I like putting someone who actually has a chance at getting into the place. So one of the other things is, generally speaking, under a lease option, they cannot sublet it. On a rare occasion, I would do a master lease option, and that's where they do have the right to sublet it to someone. If they do that, then I build out paperwork called an assignment of rents. And that assignment of rents basically says that if, you know, they fail to make their payments, then I would step in and be able to collect it from the tenant. Does that make sense? So this is, as an exit, some people may say, hey, you know, I have this deal and it's not one I want to keep forever, but maybe I can structure it to where the upsides are is you get a little bit of money today, right? 5, 10,000, I don't know, whatever that amount down is. You get a little bit of cash flow over time from the, you know, the rents, and then you probably have some underlying financing with it, so you get cash flow, and then you get a chunk of change at the end when they cash you out in the, you know, the few years. You just did one in Gulfport,
Yeah, we
right?
did one in Gulfport. So there was a deal that came up. It was basically a substitute deal.